I stared at the pork loin on the supermarket shelf and suddenly laughed. 10 years ago, my novel was sought after by millions of readers. Now, my worth is only reflected in judging which cut of meat to buy for sweet and sour pork. I'm even looked down upon by my own child as useless, so much so that he feels embarrassed by me attending a parent-teacher conference. Relatives and friends go even further, calling me a kept man. I was lost in thought. Just then my phone vibrated. A message from my wife, Li Weiniing, popped up. "I have a work dinner tonight. Remember to check Xiaonan's homework." I took a deep breath and, word by word, typed into the reply box, "We need to talk about the contract for my new book." My name is Mo Chiffon. I used to be an online novelist with a decent bit of fame in a certain niche. 10 years ago, my novel, City's Edge, was serialized on a literary website, and its readership once surged into the top 3. Back then, I received messages from readers every day. Some said my writing was as sharp as a knife, capable of dissecting the true souls hidden beneath the glamorous facade of city dwellers. Now, I stand in the fresh produce section of a supermarket, a piece of pork loin in my hand, contemplating whether to make sweet and sour pork or stir-fried pork with green peppers for dinner tonight. My phone vibrated. It was a message from my wife, Li Weiniing. "I have a work dinner tonight, so I won't be home to eat. Remember to check Xiaonan's homework." I sighed, put the loin I had chosen back, and picked up a smaller piece. One person doesn't need that much. "Buying groceries again, Mr. Mo?" Master Zhang, the butcher, greeted me familiarly. "The pork belly is good today. Want some?" "No thanks, just this loin will do," I said with a smile. "You really are a model husband, coming to buy groceries and cook in person every day," Master Zhang said while weighing the meat. "If only my wife were half as diligent as you." I took the bag without replying. I had been hearing such compliments for 10 years, and they had long since turned from initial pride to a present numbness. A model husband? Just a house husband who revolves around the stove. When I got home and had just put the groceries in the kitchen, I heard my son, Mo Xiaonan, shout from the living room, "Dad, I'm hungry. Dinner will be ready soon. Go to your homework first," I replied, tying on my apron. "Homework's done." My 12-year-old son sat on the sofa, legs swinging, playing on his phone without looking up. "Dad, are you going to the parent-teacher conference tomorrow?" "If your mom can't make it, I will." I skillfully sliced the meat, my knife work as precise as it had been for the past decade. "Oh," my son responded. Then, as if suddenly remembering something, "Right, the teacher said parents need to prepare a self-introduction, talk about their job and stuff." "Dad, what are you going to say?" The knife paused on the cutting board. How should I introduce myself? An online novelist? That was 10 years ago. A freelancer? A house husband? Or should I just say unemployed? Just say, "I work from home," I finally answered. My son pouted. "All my classmates know you just cook at home all day. Last time, Wang Ming even asked me if you were that kept man." The knife accidentally nicked my finger. A bead of blood welled up, but I felt no pain. Kept man. That label had been a thorn in my heart for a long time. "Don't listen to their nonsense," I said, forcing a fatherly authority. "Dad used to be a writer. I wrote a lot of things." "That was before," my son said dismissively. "Aren't you just a house husband now?" My classmate Li Xiaoming's mom is a housewife too, but she even runs a micro-business online. I didn't say anything more, silently turning back to my cooking. As the cooking fumes rose, my eyes began to sting. I wasn't sure if it was from the smoke or something else. After dinner, my wife came home. The sound of her high heels clicked in the entryway. As usual, I hurried over to take her bag and coat. "I closed a big deal with a client today," Li Weiniing said, a victor's smile on her face. She took off her coat to reveal a tailored, professional suit. They were trying to lowball at first, but I persuaded them with just a few sentences. "You've worked hard. Want something to eat? I can heat up dinner for you," I asked. "No need. I ate at the dinner." She waved her hand, walking towards the bedroom. "Is Xiaonan asleep?" "He just fell asleep." Li Weiniing nodded, then suddenly remembered something. "Right, Xiaonan's parent-teacher conference is tomorrow. I can't go, so you go. Dress decently. Don't wear that old jacket again." "I know," I answered in a low voice, watching her walk into the bathroom. The sound of running water soon followed. Late at night, I lay beside my wife, listening to her even breathing, but I couldn't fall asleep. Gently, I rose and went to the study, the only place in this house that still held traces of my past. On the bookshelf, several dust-covered books bore my name on their covers. In the drawer beneath the computer desk lay a trophy from a small literary award I won 10 years ago. I turned on the computer and clicked open the long-neglected writing software. When was the last time I opened it? 3 years ago. 5 years ago. The last saved document on the screen was still the final chapter of City's Edge. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, yet they wouldn't descend. I realized I no longer knew how to write. The words that once flowed like a spring, the story inspirations that kept me awake at night, they had all vanished without a trace. In their place were the daily prices of vegetables, my wife's schedule, my son's school timetable. Closing the computer, I walked to the balcony and lit a cigarette, the only bad habit I'd kept at home. Amidst the swirling smoke, I recalled the decision I made 10 years ago. Back then, Liwaning's career was just taking off, and she was busy day in and day out. Although my writing had seen some success, my income was unstable. After she fell ill from working overtime for 3 consecutive days, I said, "How about I stop writing for a while and take care of you at home?" She was moved to tears, saying she would support my writing again once her career stabilized. Later, she truly became more and more successful, rising from an ordinary employee to a senior executive. And I, step by step, retreated into the home, transforming from occasional writer into a full-time housewife. It wasn't that I hadn't tried to start over. About 5 years ago, I attempted a new story and sent it to my old editor. He politely remarked that the style was outdated. When my wife found out, she said, "The market changes so fast now, it's normal that you can't keep up. Don't worry about it." Later, our son was born, and my life was completely filled with diapers, baby formula, and kindergarten. Writing, it became an unattainable dream. The next day was the parent-teacher conference. I put on my most presentable shirt and trousers and arrived at the school half an hour early. There were already quite a few parents in the classroom, chatting in small groups. I found a corner to sit down and lowered my head to look through my son's recent test papers. "You must be Mo Xiaonan's father, right?" A well-dressed lady sat down next to me. "I'm Wang Ming's mother. I often hear Ming mention you." "Hello," I nodded politely. "I hear you used to be a writer?" she asked curiously. "Have you published any books?" Just as I was about to answer, my son suddenly ran over, "Dad." The teacher said all the parents have to go to the front and introduce themselves. The parent-teacher conference began. The head teacher, Ms. Lee, smilingly asked each parent to briefly introduce themselves and their child. When it was my turn, I stood up, feeling everyone's eyes on me. "I am Mo Xiaonan's father, Mo Shifan." I paused for a moment. "Currently, I'm mainly responsible for household affairs." A few soft chuckles rippled through the classroom. I saw my son lower his head, his ears bright red. "Mr. Mo used to be a writer, you know," Wang Ming's mother suddenly interjected. "My son Ming says Mo Xiaonan's compositions are exceptionally good. He must have inherited his father's talent." I gave her a grateful look and added, "Yes, I used to write some novels, and now I'm considering starting to write again." After the conference ended, my son trotted ahead, unwilling to walk beside me. When we got home, he slammed his door shut. I heard muffled sobs from inside. "Xiaonan," I knocked. "What's wrong?" The door opened. My son, his eyes red, glared at me. "Why did you have to lie? You're not a writer at all. My classmates are all laughing at me, saying my dad is a liar." I didn't lie. I tried to explain. Dad really used to be a writer. "That was in the past," my son shouted. "Now you're nothing. You just buy groceries and cook. Li Xiaoming's mom is a housewife too, but at least she has her own career. What about you? Besides waiting on mom, what else can you do?" His words stabbed me like a knife. I wanted to retort, but found myself speechless. He was right. Besides buying groceries and cooking, what else could I do? In 10 years, I had lived myself into a shadow, attached to the lives of my wife and son, but had forgotten who I was. That evening, Liwaning came home on time for a change. At the dinner table, our son ate with his head down, silent. "What's wrong?" My wife keenly sensed something was off. "It's nothing." I forced a smile. "It's just the parent-teacher conference today." "Dad lied at the conference." My son suddenly looked up. "He said he was a writer, but he's just a house husband. All my classmates laughed at me." Li Weiniing frowned. "Xiaonan, is that how you talk to your father?" I'm just telling the truth. My son threw down his chopsticks and ran back to his room. My wife sighed. Why are you arguing with a child? Why did you have to bring up being a writer? I was just telling the truth. I felt a surge of indignation. I am a writer, or at least I used to be. That was so many years ago. Li Weining said dismissively. What's the point of saying that now? It will only confuse the child. I didn't argue further. After dinner, my wife went to comfort our son, and I cleared the table alone. As the water washed over the plates, I stared at my reflection, a 40-year-old man. How many unfulfilled dreams were hidden in the wrinkles at the corners of my eyes. Late that night, I went to the study again and turned on the computer. This time, without hesitation, I typed a line onto the blank document. Rebirth. The protagonist of the story is a middle-aged man who had given up on his dreams for many years and one day suddenly awakens, deciding to reclaim his lost self. My fingers flew across the keyboard, and the long-lost pleasure of creation rushed over me like a tide. I wrote and wrote, losing track of time, until the sky outside began to lighten. For a whole week, I secretly wrote every day after my family had fallen asleep. During the day, while grocery shopping and cooking, my mind was filled with the plot of the story. I started carrying a small notebook with me, jotting down ideas as soon as inspiration struck. On Friday night, Li Weining came out after a shower and saw me sitting on the edge of the bed writing something. What are you writing? She asked curiously. Nothing, just jotting down tomorrow's menu, I said, quickly closing the notebook. She gave me a suspicious look, but didn't press further. After she fell asleep, I quietly got up and went to the study again. The next day was the weekend, and I got up later than usual. As I went downstairs, I heard my wife and son talking in the kitchen. Your dad has been a bit strange lately, Li Weining said. He's always up late at night. I don't know what he's doing. Probably secretly playing games, our son said dismissively. A lot of dads in my class are like that. Househusband would never, my wife snorted. He can barely use a smartphone. Their conversation made my chest tighten. In their eyes, was I really such a boring person with no sense of self? In the afternoon, while my wife took our son to his tutoring class, I sent the 30,000-word first draft to Old Chun, an editor I had worked with 10 years ago. After sending the email, my heart pounded like a novice submitting a manuscript for the first time. To my surprise, Old Chun replied quickly. Old Mo, it's been 10 years. I thought you'd left the scene for good. I've read the draft. Your style is much more mature than before. It has depth. How about you send me the full manuscript to take a look? I stared at the screen, my eyes welling up. 10 years, and someone still remembered me. Someone still recognized my writing. From that day on, I wrote even more frantically. After finishing the housework during the day, I would snatch some time to write. Late at night, after my family was asleep, I often wrote until the early hours of the morning. My life suddenly had a new focus. It no longer just revolved around my family. I started paying attention to my appearance, wearing the glasses I often wore 10 years ago, and even got a new haircut. Li Weining noticed the change in me. One evening, she leaned against the headboard and looked at me. What's been up with you lately? You seem strange. Have I? I pretended to be absorbed in my book. You've started caring about your looks. You're always up late. And sometimes when I talk to you, you're absent-minded. She narrowed her eyes. Don't tell me you're... My heart tightened. Going through menopause. She laughed after saying it. I laughed along with her, but inwardly, I breathed a sigh of relief. A month later, I finished the 150,000-word novel, Rebirth. The day after I sent it to Old Chun, he called, his voice filled with excitement. Old Mo, this novel is fantastic. I've already recommended it to the editor-in-chief. Publication should be no problem. After hanging up, I stood on the balcony, watching the distant sunset, and tears suddenly streamed down my face. 10 years. I was finally Househusband again, not just CEO Li's husband or Xiaonan's dad. However, the good times didn't last. On the very evening I received the publisher's preliminary approval, Li Weining came home from work early and saw a light shining from under the study door. She pushed the door open and saw me completely engrossed, staring at the computer screen. What are you doing? She asked. I hurriedly minimized the writing window. Nothing, just browsing the news. She walked over, moved the mouse, and directly clicked open the minimized window. On the screen, the document for rebirth was in plain sight. What is this? Her voice turned cold. I'm writing a novel. I knew I couldn't hide it anymore, I said. It's almost finished, and a publisher is interested. So that's why you've been so secretive lately? Li Weiniang's voice grew louder. You've been writing a novel behind my back. I wasn't doing it behind your back. We talked about this, she interrupted me. We agreed 10 years ago you'd be in charge of the family, and I'd be in charge of my career. And now you suddenly decide you want to write? Who's going to do the housework? Who's going to look after the child? I can manage both. Manage both. She sneered. You think writing is child's play? You haven't written in 10 years. What good could you possibly write now? Her words stung. I took a deep breath. Old Chun, my former editor, he said this novel is very good. The publisher has already. Enough. Li Weiniang snapped the laptop shut. I don't care about any publisher. This family needs you. I need you. You know how busy I am with work, and now you want to chase some writing dream? So selfish. Selfish. I felt my blood boil. For 10 years, I gave up my career to take care of this family. And now that I want to start writing again, I'm selfish. Yes, you are selfish, she said, her tone definitive. Do you have any idea how much pressure I'm under? The entire family's financial burden is on my shoulders. And you just want to suddenly drop everything. I never said I was going to drop everything. I raised my voice. I just want to find a piece of myself again. Yourself. She laughed mockingly. Emo Chiffon, wake up. You're a husband. You're a father. That's yourself. Our argument woke our son. He stood at the doorway, looking at us in terror. Dad, Mom, what are you arguing about? Li Weiniang immediately composed herself, walking over to hug our son. It's nothing, sweetheart. Daddy has some ideas about work. We were just discussing it. Our son looked at me. Dad, are you going to work? I didn't know how to answer. Li Weiniang cut in first. No, he won't. Daddy was just thinking out loud. Right, Chiffon? Caught between my wife's warning glare and my son's expectant eyes, I remained silent. That night, we lay back to back, neither of us sleeping. At 3 a.m, I quietly got up, grabbed my laptop and a few clothes, and gently closed the front door. I sat down in a nearby 24-hour coffee shop, opened my laptop, and continued editing my novel. At 6 a.m, I sent a message to Old Chun. I've decided to publish the novel, no matter what happens. Then I turned off my phone and watched the city outside slowly awaken. For the first time in 10 years, I felt so clear-headed. Perhaps this was the feeling of being reborn. I temporarily moved into my friend Zhang Yi's rental apartment. He was one of the few college classmates I still kept in touch with. Now a creative director at an advertising agency, he was often away on business, so his place was usually empty. Stay as long as you want, Zhang Yi said, tossing me the keys. I've rented this place for 3 years anyway. It's just sitting empty. He paused. But old Mo, are you really planning on running away from home like this? I'm not running away from home, I said, placing my suitcase in the corner. I'm just giving myself some space. Zhang Yi shrugged. A stay-at-home husband of 10 years suddenly wants to become a writer. Of course your wife can't accept it. He picked up his briefcase. I have to catch a flight. There's beer in the fridge. Take care of yourself. After the door closed, I looked around the simple one-bedroom apartment. The living room had only a sofa and a dining table cluttered with things. In the bedroom, the single bed had an unmade quilt on it. It was a stark contrast to my meticulously tidy home, where every corner was spotless and every item had its designated place. I opened my suitcase and placed my laptop on the dining table. A faded cartoon sticker that my son had put on the corner of the screen when he was 5 was still there. After turning it on, I directly opened the document for rebirth and continued the writing that had been interrupted last night. The sound of my fingers tapping on the keyboard was especially clear in the empty room. As I wrote a scene where the middle-aged protagonist reminisced about giving up his dreams, my eyes suddenly welled up. This wasn't a novel. This was my story. I wrote until 3 a.m. and fell asleep on the sofa. There was no soft mattress, no sound of my wife's even breathing, no worry about my son kicking off his blanket in the middle of the night, only an unfamiliar ceiling and the occasional passing car headlights from outside the window. The next morning, I was awakened by the harsh sunlight. I looked at my phone and saw it was already 9 o'clock. For the first time in 10 years, I hadn't woken up at 6 to make breakfast. My phone showed 7 missed calls, all from Li Weiniang. I hesitated for a moment, then dialed her number. Househusband. My wife's voice, suppressing her anger, came from the other end of the line. Do you have any idea how worried I've been? Xiaonan keeps asking where you went. I need some time, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Let's both calm down. Calm down. Her voice jumped an octave. Do you think our home is a hotel? You could just come and go as you please? It's not a hotel, it's my cage. I regretted the words as soon as they left my mouth. There were a few seconds of silence on the other end. Fine. Very well. Li Weiniang's voice was as cold as ice. Since that's how you feel, don't bother coming back. I'll take care of Xiaonan. You just focus on writing your great masterpiece. The call ended. I clutched my phone, a stone pressing on my chest. This wasn't the outcome I wanted, but there was no turning back. In the days that followed, I lived a life completely different from the past 10 years. I would wake up naturally at 5 every morning, make a cup of instant coffee, and start writing. In the morning, I'd walk in a nearby park to brainstorm plot points. In the afternoon, I'd find a quiet cafe to continue writing. In the evening, I'd have a simple takeout meal and then revise what I had written during the day. A week later, Old Chen asked me to meet him at the publishing house. The novel is mostly fine, he said, pushing up his glasses, but the protagonist's return to his family at the end feels a bit abrupt. He looked at me meaningfully. Has your own experience influenced your writing? I gave a wry smile. Is it that obvious? Old Chen sighed. I've known you for over a decade. This novel has more power than your previous works because it's real. He paused. But life isn't a novel. Returning to the family isn't necessarily the best ending. After leaving the publishing house, I wandered aimlessly down the street and found myself at a fast food restaurant. After ordering and sitting down, the waitress suddenly stared at me. Are you Househusband? I looked up in surprise at the young woman, who was in her early 20s. I'm a reader of yours, she said excitedly. I've read City's Edge 3 times. It's been 10 years. Are you finally releasing a new book? I was at a loss for words. After 10 years, someone still remembered my work. The new book is coming out soon, I stammered. That's wonderful. Her eyes sparkled. I'll definitely buy it. You know, your writing had a huge impact on me. I'm studying in the Chinese literature department now. Walking out of the fast food restaurant with the hamburger, my hands were trembling slightly. To be so moved by the recognition of a stranger. For the past 10 years, the only feedback I'd gotten at home was the soup's too salty, this shirt isn't ironed properly, or why did you buy these groceries again? Back in my rented room, my phone rang again. This time it was my son. Dad. His voice was a little hesitant. When are you coming home? My chest tightened. What's wrong? You miss me? No. He stammered. It's just, Mom's been really busy lately and hasn't had time to check my homework. I have an essay due tomorrow. I closed my eyes. So, he just needed my help with his homework. Send it to me. I finally agreed. That evening, my son's essay arrived by email. The title was My Father. I held my breath and clicked open the document. My father is an ordinary man. He doesn't have an enviable job, nor does he have a lot of money. What he does every day is buy groceries, cook, and clean. I used to envy my classmates' parents. Some were company bosses, others were university professors. Until last week, when I found a stack of paper filled with writing in my father's study. My fingers froze on the keyboard. It was a novel my father had written. I read in secret, and although there were parts one didn't understand, I thought it was amazing. I suddenly understood that it's not that my father lacks ability. He just chose to take care of the family. I don't know if he regrets this choice, but I know that without him, my mom and I wouldn't live so comfortably. Tears dripped onto the keyboard. I never imagined my son saw me this way. The next day, I woke up early and went to the entrance of my son's school. When I saw him walk out with his backpack, I called out Xiaonan. He looked up in surprise, then hurried over. Dad, why are you here? To take you to school. I took his backpack, and to talk about that essay of yours. My son's ears turned red. You read it? It was very well written. I ruffled his hair, but some parts aren't accurate. Dad didn't choose to take care of the family. He gave up other choices. My son suddenly stopped and asked, Do you regret it then? I looked at his young but serious face, unsure how to answer. Just then, a black car pulled up beside us. The window rolled down, revealing Li Weiniang's weary face. "Get in. I'll take Xiao into school." Her gaze shifted between me and our son. "Do you want to come along?" I shook my head. "I have something to do." The corners of Li Weiniang's mouth tightened. "Suit yourself," she said to our son. "Get in, you're going to be late." Watching the car drive away, I stood rooted to the spot, feeling a strange sense of relief. At least now, I could honestly say I have something to do. I needed to write. It wasn't an excuse, but my actual life. Back at the rented room, I revised the novel's ending again. This time, I no longer forced the protagonist to return to his family. Instead, I had him choose a middle path, neither completely abandoning his family nor entirely sacrificing himself. The day the manuscript was finalized, Old Chun called, his voice ecstatic. The editor-in-chief gave it the green light. "First printing of 10,000 copies. It'll be on the market next month. They're also planning to arrange a few book signings for you." After hanging up, I paced back and forth in the tiny rented room like a fledgling author publishing his first book. 10 years. For 10 years, I finally had something to be proud of again, other than the title of Li Weiniang's husband. That night, I had a dream. I dreamt I was back on that night 10 years ago when Li Weiniang was sick in bed and I offered to give up writing to take care of the family. The me in the dream shook his head and said, "No, we can hire a nanny, but I can't give up writing." When I woke up, my pillow was wet. A dream was just a dream. Time could not be turned back. But maybe it wasn't too late to start over now. The next day, I decided to go home to get some clean clothes. I picked a time when Li Weiniang should have been at the office and quietly let myself in with my key. The house was a mess. Takeout boxes were piled on the dining table. Dirty clothes were scattered on the sofa, and the kitchen sink was overflowing with unwashed dishes. This was nothing like the home I had meticulously maintained for a decade. I quickly gathered a few necessities. Just as I was about to leave, the door to the study caught my eye. Pushing it open, I found the computer was on, the screen displaying an article about my new book, author Mo Xiufan, silent for a decade, returns with rebirth. My heart raced. Li Weiniang was paying attention to my new book. As I was about to close the web page, I noticed another tab open in the browser. It was Li Weiniang's company's internal system, showing she had submitted a request for annual leave, citing family matters. This was highly unusual. Li Weiniang never took time off. Even when our son had a 104-degree fever, she had just sent me to the hospital with him alone. Puzzled, I left the house. Back in my rented room, I sent my son a text. "How's your mom been lately?" His reply came quickly. "Weird. She actually asked me what I liked to eat yesterday, and said she wanted to learn how to cook. She ended up making a huge mess in the kitchen, and we still ordered takeout in the end." I stared at the phone screen, picturing Li Weiniang, the career-driven woman, fumbling in the kitchen. I felt a pang of pity, mixed with a strange sense of satisfaction. It turned out that without me, her life would fall into disarray too. A week before the new book's launch, the publisher arranged a small press conference. I dug out my only suit and nervously practiced answers to potential questions. On the day of the event, my legs felt a bit weak when I walked into the conference room and saw more than 20 journalists. But as soon as I started talking about the creative process behind Rebirth, the nervousness vanished. I spoke about midlife crises, the loss and reconstruction of self-worth, as if I were telling everyone's story. Mr. M.O., a female journalist, raised her hand. "Do the experiences of the protagonist in your book bear any resemblance to your own? I heard you were silent for 10 years. I took a deep breath. Yes, I spent 10 years as a stay-at-home husband and only recently started writing again. A stir went through the room. Another journalist pressed on. Why choose to return now? Was it due to financial pressure at home? On the contrary, I gave a wry smile. My wife is very successful. We have no financial pressure. I returned to writing simply to find myself again. After the event, Old Chun clapped me on the shoulder. That was brilliant. The media loves a story with a hook. Stay-at-home husband of a decade rediscovers his writing dream. What a great headline. I managed a weak smile. I knew that when these reports came out, Li Weiniang would see them, her colleagues would see them, and even the parents of my son's classmates would see them. I didn't know what the consequences would be, but there was no turning back. Sure enough, that night, my phone blew up. Li Weiniang made a dozen consecutive calls, finally sending a text. Must you air our family matters for everyone to see? Xiaonan's classmates' parents are all asking me about it. As I was about to reply, another message came. The publisher said your book is coming out next week. Why didn't you tell me? I stared at the phone, not knowing how to answer. What was I to tell her? That I was afraid of her opposition? That I needed to prove my own worth? Or that I just wanted her to see that Househusband was more than just a house husband? In the end, I only replied with one sentence. Let's talk. We agreed to meet at the cafe where we had our first date. 10 years had passed, and the cafe had been renovated several times. It was nothing like its former self. When I arrived, Li Weiniang was already sitting in a corner with 2 cups of coffee in front of her. She had lost weight and had dark circles under her eyes, but she was still dressed in a smart business suit, her hair tied neatly in a bun. I noticed her fingers drumming unconsciously on the tabletop, a little habit of hers when she was nervous. Xiaonan is at a friend's house for a play date. She spoke as soon as I sat down. We have 2 hours. I nodded and took a sip of the coffee. It was the double espresso she always liked, so bitter it made me frown. So, she said, looking directly into my eyes, you've written a book about a middle-aged man finding himself. Not entirely. I put the cup down. That's just a part of it. The media has already framed you as a genius writer held back by his family, she said, her voice laced with sarcasm. And I, of course, am the vicious wife who stifles your talent. I shook my head. I never said that. But you let them think it. Li Weiniang's voice suddenly rose, drawing the attention of those around us. She lowered her voice. For 10 years, Househusband, I've worked 12 hours a day under immense pressure to provide the best for this family. And you? You live in my house, drive my car, use my money for groceries and cooking, and now you turn around and accuse me of stifling your talent. Her words stabbed me like a knife. In a way, she was right. For the past 10 years, I had indeed enjoyed a comfortable life, never having to worry about finances. I'm not accusing you, I said, trying to remain calm. I just needed a little space for myself. For what? She scoffed. For that literary novel of yours that will barely sell a few copies? Househusband, be realistic. You're 40 years old. The literary market has completely changed. The initial print run was 10,000 copies, I said calmly. It's already been reprinted. Li Weiniang was stunned. The number was clearly beyond her expectations. So what? Her tone softened. A moment's success doesn't mean anything. This family needs stability. It needs you. To do what? I retorted. To cook? To clean? To pick up Xiaonan from school? We can hire people to do those things. But my writing, that's something only I can do. We fell into silence. The cafe's background music changed to a melancholic piano piece. You know, Li Weiniang said suddenly, for the past month, I've tried doing the things you normally do. She gave a self-deprecating laugh. I made a complete mess of the kitchen, forgot to prepare Xiaonan's school uniform, and even missed his parent-teacher conference. I looked at her in surprise. It was hard to imagine the perfectionist Li Weiniang allowing her life to become so chaotic. I realized what you've been doing all these years, she continued, but I also realized something else. I don't need you just for those things. I held my breath, waiting for her to continue. We can hire a part-time helper. We can adjust my work hours. Her voice grew quieter and quieter, but I don't want to lose you. It was the first time in 10 years I had heard the ever-strong Li Weiniang sound so vulnerable. My heart pounded in my chest, and I didn't know how to respond. Give me some time, I said finally. Let's talk properly after the new book launch event is over. She nodded. As she stood up to leave, she suddenly turned back. By the way, Xiaonan misses you a lot. He printed out the announcement for your new book and taped it to the head of his bed. My eyes instantly welled up with tears. In all this chaos, at least my son was starting to be proud of me. On the day the book was released, I held a signing at a downtown bookstore. More people showed up than expected, the lines stretching outside the store's entrance. After signing a few dozen copies, I looked up to stretch my neck and suddenly saw a familiar figure at the end of the line, Xiaonan, standing next to Li Weiniang. My heart skipped a beat. My son waved at me excitedly, while Li Weiniang's expression was complicated and hard to read. When it was their turn, my son pushed the book in front of me. "Dad, sign it for me. I want to tell my whole class that my dad is a great writer." My hand trembled slightly as I wrote on the title page. "To my first and most important reader, love, Dad." Li Weining didn't hold the book, just stood to the side. While I looked at her, she said softly, "Let's have dinner together after this. Shannon wants to eat your braised pork ribs." This sentence was like a key, unlocking a door in my heart that had been locked for a long time. For the first time in 10 years, she had taken the initiative to say she wanted to eat something I cooked. Not as something to be taken for granted, but as an invitation, a gesture of reconciliation. After the book signing, we went to the supermarket. Just like every day for the past 10 years, I selected fresh pork ribs and ingredients. But this time, my son took the initiative to help me with the basket, and Li Weining stood in front of the vegetable section, somewhat clumsily trying to pick scallions the way I did. "How about this one?" she asked me, holding up a slightly yellowed scallion. "You should pick the ones that are bright green and straight." I took the scallion from her hand, accidentally brushing her fingers. We both froze for a moment, but didn't pull away immediately. On the way home, my son chattered excitedly about school, while Li Weining and I listened quietly. For a moment, I felt like we were just an ordinary family of three, not a powerful career woman and a house husband, just two people in love with their child. But I knew the problem wasn't really solved. When we got home and faced the mountains of housework and work pressure, those conflicts would resurface. The only difference was that now we both understood. Marriage shouldn't be about one person sacrificing for the other, but about two whole individuals growing together. As the braised pork ribs simmered in the pot, Li Weining quietly came up behind me. "I applied for a transfer," she said softly. "Starting next week. My work hours will be more normal." I turned in surprise. "Didn't you always want to compete for the general manager position?" "Yes," she smiled faintly. "But I also want a complete family. Maybe we can find a balance." I didn't say anything, just reached out and hugged her. For the first time in 10 years, I felt we were standing on equal ground, not as a caretaker and the one being cared for, but as two partners who respected each other. After dinner, our son went to his room to do his homework, and Li Weining and I sat on the balcony. In the dark of the night, she suddenly asked, "What happened to the protagonist in your book in the end?" "He found a balance," I said, looking at the distant lights. "He didn't give up on his family, nor did he give up on himself." She was silent for a moment. "Real life isn't that simple." "I know," I said, taking her hand, "but it's worth a try." She didn't pull her hand away. On this quiet night, that was enough. 2 weeks after the new book was released, Old Chun called. His voice changed with excitement. "Old Mo, Rebirth has shot up to number 3 on the bestseller list. Bookstores are all demanding more stock, and the media has gone crazy." I held the phone, standing by the window of Zhang Yi's rental apartment, looking at the gray sky outside, momentarily speechless. "Listen," Old Chin continued, "the TV station's cultural interview wants to do an exclusive interview with you, the day after tomorrow in the afternoon. Also, the City Morning Post wants to serialize the story of your creative journey." After hanging up, I opened my computer to check the sales data. The numbers didn't lie. My book had really taken off. On social media, the topic of Househusband of 10 years rediscovers his writing dream was gaining traction. I casually clicked on a few comments. "Rebirth is written so realistically. Every middle-aged person should read it. Mo Shufan's writing has a texture that has been polished by life." Who would have thought that the online writer from back then would deliver such a work after 10 years of silence? I closed the computer, my hands trembling slightly. 10 years. I was finally no longer Li Weining's husband, but the writer Mo Shufan. That night, I decided to go home to have a formal talk. When I rang the doorbell, my heart was beating so fast it felt like it would leap out of my chest. The door opened. It was my son. "Dad!" Mo Xiaonan's eyes lit up, and he turned to shout, "Mom, Dad's back." Li Weining came out of the kitchen, wearing the familiar blue plaid apron around her waist, a spatula still in her hand. Seeing me, her expression changed complexly several times. "Dinner's almost ready," was all she finally said, before turning back to the kitchen. The house was much tidier than last time, but I could still see the chaos from my absence. There were uncleaned coffee stains on the coffee table, The sofa cover was wrinkled, and the flowers in the vase had withered. My son pulled me down onto the sofa. "Dad, everyone in my class is talking about your book." Wang Ming said his mom bought a copy and cried while reading it. I stroked his head. "Have you read it?" "Just the beginning." He lowered his voice. "Mom won't let me read too much. Says it'll affect my studies." The atmosphere during dinner was a bit awkward. Li Weiniang's cooking was mediocre. The shredded pork with green peppers was too salty, the tomato and egg soup was too bland, and the rice was slightly undercooked. But both my son and I ate every last bite. "The publisher says the book is selling very well." I broke the silence. Li Weiniang's hand paused as she was getting food. "I heard. People in my company are talking about it too." "Really?" I was a little surprised. Director Liu even asked me today, "Is your husband that emo Shufan who wrote Rebirth?" Her tone was calm, but I could detect a subtle fluctuation of emotion. After dinner, my son went to his room to do homework, and Li Weiniang and I stood on the balcony. In the night, the lines of her profile were still so clear and beautiful. "I plan to move back in," I said directly, "if you don't object." She turned to look at me, her eyes glinting in the darkness. "Are you sure? You're writing." "I can write at home." I cut in. "Zhang Yi's lease is up, and besides, I miss home." Li Weiniang was silent for a long time before finally nodding gently. "Okay." Just like that, I ended my month-long running away from home and returned to the home I had meticulously maintained for 10 years. But everything was different. I was no longer the meek and submissive house husband, but a writer with my own career. Li Weiniang was no longer the absolute ruler of the household. She had learned to compromise and even started to learn to do housework. The next morning, I woke up naturally at 6. I was about to habitually go to the kitchen to make breakfast when I found Li Weiniang was already up, fumbling to fry an egg. "Let me," I said, taking the spatula. She hesitated for a moment, then moved aside. "Shaolin has an exam today. I was thinking." "You go get ready for work." I flipped the egg skillfully. "I can still handle these things." She looked at me and suddenly smiled. "You know, I tried frying eggs 12 times this past month. They either burned or fell apart. Everyone has things they are good at and not good at." I placed the perfect sunny-side-up egg on a plate, just like how I could never learn your business negotiation skills. At that moment, I realized our relationship was undergoing a subtle change. From the past omnipotent housewife and incompetent husband to partners who recognized and appreciated each other's expertise. As the popularity of Rebirth continued to soar, my life became increasingly busy. Interviews, book signings, and literary events followed one after another, and I was often out of the house all day. Li Weiniang had to adjust her work schedule to take on more housework and the responsibility of looking after our son. One Friday afternoon, I came home after recording a TV program and found that Li Weiniang had, uncharacteristically, gotten off work early. She was in the kitchen, staring at a recipe in frustration. "Need help?" I put down my briefcase, a birthday gift from Li Weiniang last year that I had barely used. She turned around, the exhaustion on her face obvious. "These steps for the braised pork. I don't understand them." I moved closer to look at the recipe, catching the faint scent of her perfume. It had been a long time since we had stood so close. "First, blanch the meat," I explained, pointing at the recipe, and then, "Emo Shufan." She suddenly interrupted me. "I have to go to Shanghai for a business trip for 3 days next week." "Oh," I nodded. "I can take care of Xiaonan." "No." She took a deep breath. "I mean, can you come with me? Isn't the publishing house looking to discuss a new book contract with you? You could arrange to meet them in Shanghai. We could go on a business trip together like we used to." I was stunned. 10 years ago, when we were first married, we often used her business trips as an opportunity to travel together. Back then, I was a moderately well-known online writer, and I would often write in the hotel room while waiting for her to finish work. "Okay," I heard myself say, "I'll ask old Shun." That night, after our son was asleep, Li Weiniang took out a folder. "I've organized your income for the past month." I opened it to find detailed spreadsheets, royalties, manuscript fees, event appearance fees. The total came to a surprising $150,000, more than all the money I had earned in the past 10 years combined. At this rate, Li Weiniang's voice was a little dry. "Your income this year might surpass mine." I looked up at her, trying to find a trace of mockery or dissatisfaction on her face, but all I saw was a complex mix of emotions. "This is still far from your annual salary," I said, closing the folder, "and income from writing isn't stable." "I'm not comparing," she interrupted. "I'm just happy for you." We were silent for a moment. Then she suddenly said, "I've quit my job." "What?" I almost jumped off the sofa. "Not really quit," she explained quickly. "I applied for a transfer. A demotion from marketing director to department manager. Fixed hours, no more frequent business trips." I looked at her in shock. Marketing director was the position she had strived for 10 years, an achievement earned through countless nights of overtime. "Why?" I asked. She looked at her own hands. "This past month, I've realized some things are more important than a title." She looked up at me. "Besides, now that you have an income, our financial pressure is much lighter." A warmth spread through my chest. The formidable Li Weiniang, who had never bowed her head to anyone, had actually taken a step back for the sake of our family. The trip to Shanghai was surprisingly smooth. Li Weiniang's negotiation was a great success, and I finalized the contract for my new book with the publisher. The first print run was set directly at 50,000 copies, and the advance was double what I had expected. On our last night, we celebrated at a high-end restaurant on the Bund. Li Weiniang wore an elegant black dress, and I had changed into a newly bought suit. For the first time in 10 years, we looked like a couple who were equals. "To your new book," she said, raising her glass, and to us. In the clear clinking of our glasses, I thought I could hear the crumbling of some old order and the beginning of a new life. After returning home, life gradually found a new rhythm. I wrote every morning and handled publishing matters in the afternoon. Li Weiniang got off work at 6 on the dot and was responsible for our son's homework. We hired an hourly worker for cleaning and dinner, and on weekends, we cooked together. One Saturday morning, I was in my study revising the manuscript for my new book when my son knocked and came in. "Dad," he said excitedly, "I won first prize in the essay competition." "That's amazing." I pulled him into a hug. "What was the topic?" "My writer father," he said proudly. "I wrote about how you started writing again, how you taught me to write essays." My throat suddenly tightened. "Can I see it?" My son handed me the notebook. In his childish yet sincere words, I saw the image he had of me. No longer the incompetent father who only knows how to cook, but a writer bravely chasing his dreams. "The teacher said a parent needs to sign it," my son said, pointing to the end of the essay, "and you need to go to the school to accept the award." "I'll definitely go," I said, signing my name solemnly. "It would be my honor." My son suddenly leaned close to my ear. Mom cried too when she saw this essay. That night, Li Weiniang came home late from work while I was in the kitchen warming some milk. She put down her briefcase and leaned wearily against the doorframe. "Xiaonan's essay," she began. "I saw it," I said, handing her the warm milk. "It's very well written." "He never used to write about topics like my father," she said, holding the cup. "It was always my mother." We looked at each other and smiled. In that simple moment, I felt a long-lost sense of family warmth. However, the good times didn't last. As the deadline for my new book approached, the pressure of writing mounted. And although Li Weiniang had transferred to a new position, her work was still demanding. We started arguing again over trivial matters like dividing chores and our son's education. Only this time, I no longer gave in unconditionally. One rainy night, after a heated argument, Li Weiniang slammed the door and left. I sat on the sofa, listening to the sound of raindrops hitting the window, and suddenly realized we had found a new balance, but we hadn't yet learned how to coexist within it. Half an hour later, Li Weiniang returned, her hair and clothes soaking wet. She stood in the middle of the living room, rainwater dripping from her to form a small puddle on the floor. "I hate this," her voice trembled. "I hate what we've become." "We haven't become anything," I said, handing her a towel. "We're just no longer playing our old roles." She took the towel and slowly dried her hair. "Then what roles are we playing now?" "I don't know," I said honestly, "but at least they're real." She suddenly burst into tears, the teardrops mixing with the rainwater as they streamed down her cheeks. "I'm so tired, Emo chiffon. Work, chores, our child. I can't handle it all as effortlessly as you do." I stepped forward and held her, feeling her tremble in my arms. "You don't have to do it. We can figure this out together." That night, for the first time ever, We talked until the early hours. Not arguing, but truly communicating. We created a detailed chore chart, discussed our respective work plans, and even planned future family trips. Life seemed to be back on track, only this time, the track was one we had laid together, not the result of one-sided compromise. The day I submitted the new book, Old Chin treated me to a celebratory dinner. After a few drinks, he suddenly said mysteriously, "I have some good news to tell you." "What is it?" I had become somewhat numb to the success of good news. "The Provincial Writers Association wants to invite you to a month-long writer-in-residence program," Old Chun said excitedly. "In Hangzhou, room and board are covered, and there's a creative stipend. It's a rare opportunity." I was stunned. A month? Away from home? Just when we had started to rebuild our family relationship. I need to think about it," I finally said. When I got home, Li Weining was helping our son with his math homework. Seeing me, our son cheered, "Dad, my essay was chosen for the city-wide competition." "That's fantastic." I lifted him up and spun him around, then looked at Li Weining. "There's something I want to discuss with you." In the bedroom, I told Li Weining about the residency program. Her expression shifted from surprise to contemplation, finally settling into calmness. "Do you want to go?" she asked. "From a professional standpoint, it's a great opportunity," I answered cautiously, "but from a family perspective." "Go," she said suddenly. "It's only a month. We can manage." I looked at her, surprised. "Are you sure?" "Mo Shufan." She looked me straight in the eye. "I spent 10 years turning you into my appendage. Now that you've finally found yourself again, I won't be the one to pull you back." A warmth spread through my chest, and I reached out to hug her. In that embrace, I felt true equality and respect. The weekend before the residency program began, our family went for a picnic in the countryside. Our son ran across the lawn, while Li Weining and I sat side by side on the picnic blanket, looking at the distant mountains. "Remember our first date?" she asked suddenly. "It was beautiful weather just like this." "I remember," I smiled. "You were wearing a red dress and kept talking about your 5-year career plan. And you kept talking about the novel you wanted to write," she recalled. "There was a light in your eyes back then." I turned to her. "And now?" She reached out and caressed my face. "It's back again." Our son ran back and jumped between us. "Mom, Dad, all my classmates say you're a model couple." Li Weining and I looked at each other and smiled. A model couple? We were probably the least model-like couple, having gone through conflict, separation, and readjustment to barely find a way to coexist. But perhaps it was this imperfection that made our relationship so real and strong. The night before I left for Hangzhou, as I was packing, our son secretly slipped a small box into my hand. "For you," he said mysteriously. "Don't open it until you get there." Li Weining handed me an envelope. My annual leave request was approved. "I'll bring Xiao Nan to see you in Hangzhou for the last week." I hugged them, my heart full of reluctance, yet also brimming with anticipation. This was my first time traveling alone in 10 years, not for family, but for my own career. As the train started moving, I opened the small box for my son. Inside was a fountain pen, with a line of small words engraved on the barrel, "To the best dad, the writer Mo Shufan." The scenery outside flew backward, just like those years I'd spent as a house husband. I didn't know what awaited me ahead, but I knew that no matter what happened, I was no longer the Mo Shufan who had lost himself. Autumn in Hangzhou was colder than I had imagined. The Writers' Residency Center was located in an old villa by the West Lake. The window of my room faced the shimmering lake, a picturesque scene that only made me miss home more. On the first night, I opened the small box my son had given me and placed the pen engraved with "To the best dad, the writer Mo Shufan" on my desk. Next to it was a family photo taken before I left. Li Weining in her favorite navy blue suit, our son grinning and hugging my shoulder, and me, wearing a new light gray sweater, looking somewhat unfamiliar even to myself. My phone vibrated. It was a message from Li Weining. "Have you arrived? Xiaonan wants to video chat." I made the video call, and my son's face immediately filled the screen. "Dad, your room is so big. Can you see the West Lake?" I turned the camera to the window and heard my son's voice cry out in amazement. Then, Li Weining's face appeared on the screen. Her hair was slightly damp, as if she had just showered. "Are you settling in okay?" she asked, her voice carrying a hint of the restraint I knew so well. She was trying hard to act nonchalant. "It's great," I said, adjusting the camera so she couldn't see the unpacked luggage on the bed. "Just a bit quiet." "It's definitely noisy at home," my son chimed in. "Mom burned a pot today, and the smoke alarm went off for 10 minutes. Li Weining pretended to be annoyed and patted our son's head. The small, affectionate gesture warmed my chest. I used to handle all these household chores. She never let herself be distracted by housework. We chatted a little more. My son excitedly talked about school, while Li Weining gave a brief update on her work. Before we hung up, she said suddenly, "Oh, right, I tucked some stomach medicine into the side pocket of your suitcase. Haven't you been having stomach aches recently?" I was stunned. She had remembered a physical discomfort that even I hadn't paid much attention to. After hanging up, I found a box of medicine. Tucked underneath, it was a small note. "Take care of yourself. Ing." Just a simple sentence, but I stared at it for a long time. When did the assertive Li Weining learn this kind of gentle concern? The next morning, Teacher Lin, the head of the residency center, called a meeting for all the writers. Besides me, there were 3 other writers in residence. A young man named Xiao Wu who wrote science fiction, a middle-aged female writer, Zhang Jie, who specialized in rural literature, and Lao Bai, a suspense writer who had already published 5 books. The requirement for this residency is for each of you to complete a first draft of a novella or a full-length novel, Teacher Lin said, pushing up his glasses. An editor from a publishing house will come to review the manuscripts at the end of the month. Outstanding works may be offered a contract directly. After the meeting, we exchanged pleasantries. Lao Bai patted my shoulder. "I've read your Rebirth. It's really well written. A stay-at-home dad becoming a best-selling author. Your life story is enough to fill a book." I forced a smile. Despite the success of Rebirth, I was still not used to being treated as an inspirational model. Back in my room, I opened my laptop to write. The idea for the new book had been brewing in my mind for a long time. A story about a middle-aged man who suddenly loses his way at the peak of his career. But when I actually started writing, I found the words stilted and the plot stagnant. An entire morning passed, and the document contained only a few hundred words, none of which I was satisfied with. At lunch, I ran into Xiao Wu in the cafeteria. He was a young man in his early 20s, his eyes shining when he spoke. "Teacher Mo," he said, sitting down next to me with his tray, "I really love your Rebirth, especially the sense of realism that comes from being worn down by life." I thanked him and casually asked about his own work. Xiao Wu immediately launched into an enthusiastic description of his science fiction novel, a story about time loops and multiple universes. Listening to his passionate description, I was suddenly reminded of myself 10 years ago. Back then, like him, I believed that words could change the world. "Teacher Mo," Xiao Wu asked suddenly, "why did you choose to write?" The simple question left me stunned. Why writing? At first, it was for love. Later, it was to prove myself. And now, because it's the way I get to know myself, I finally answered. Back in my room, I re-examined the concept for my new book. Perhaps that was the problem. I was trying to write a literary work that met expectations, not the story I truly wanted to tell. I deleted everything I had written that morning and started over. This time, I didn't think about the market or reviews. I just honestly wrote down my own confusion. How does a man who has regained career success find a balance between family and self? The words began to flow as if a floodgate had been opened. By evening, I had finished 3,000 words, far more smoothly than I had anticipated. That night, I video called my family again. My son excitedly told me he had won 3rd prize in the city's essay competition, while Li Weining looked exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes. "Is work going well?" I asked her. "Same as always," she answered curtly, then changed the subject. "How's your writing coming along?" We talked for less than 10 minutes before she said she had more work to do and hung up abruptly. The moment the screen went dark, I felt a strange sense of loss. The following days fell into a fixed rhythm. Writing in the morning, strolling by the West Lake for inspiration in the afternoon, and reading or talking with the other writers in the evening. My new book was progressing well, but the more I wrote, the more I realized it wasn't just a fictional story. It was turning into my own reflection and confession about my family relationships. Late one night a week later, I was revising a manuscript when my phone suddenly rang. It was Lee Waining. She was usually asleep by this time. Waining, I answered the phone, hearing an unusual silence on the other end. Is something wrong? It's nothing. Her voice was a little hoarse. I just wanted to hear your voice. My heart suddenly clenched. Lee Waining was not the type to call late at night, saying she missed someone. What really happened? I pressed. A nearly inaudible sigh came from the other end of the line. The company announced a restructuring today. My position was adjusted. What do you mean? Nominally, it's a lateral move, but in reality, it's a demotion. Her voice grew quieter. The new CEO brought in his own team, and old guards like us are being marginalized. I gripped the phone, imagining her expression at this moment. Her lower lip bitten, her eyes slightly red, but definitely holding back tears. This was the company she had fought for over a decade, the career she had built by sacrificing family time. Do you need me to come back? I asked. No need. Her voice immediately regained its usual firmness. You focus on your writing. I can handle it. After hanging up, I stood by the window, looking at the shimmering lights on Westlake, and for the first time, I felt the impulse to go home early. For the strong-willed Lee Waining to show weakness meant the situation was far more serious than she admitted. The next morning at breakfast, my absent-minded state caught Sister Zheng's attention. Having a fight with your family? She asked, handing me a cup of tea. I shook my head and briefly told her about Lee Waining. After listening, Sister Zheng said thoughtfully, women, sometimes when they say no need, they actually mean I need it badly, but they're unwilling to ask directly. That afternoon, I sent a message to my son, telling him to spend more time with his mother. My son replied quickly, Mom cried last night, but I pretended I didn't see. Dad, when are you coming back? Reading that line, my throat tightened. When was the last time Lee Waining cried? Was it when she fell ill 10 years ago? Or when our son was born? 2 more weeks, I replied. Tell me if your mom needs anything. My son sent a thinking emoji, followed by a sentence. She needs the braised pork ribs you make, but I don't know how to cook them. I gave a wry smile. For 10 years, I had always thought my value to the family was in those trivial household chores. Only now did I realize that perhaps my presence itself was a form of support. The writing that followed became difficult. Although the story was more than half complete, my mind kept drifting back home. My daily calls with Lee Waining grew shorter, and her voice became more and more tired. When I asked about work, she would always give a perfunctory answer before changing the subject. On the 10th day of my residency, Teacher Lin organized a workshop for our works. When it was my turn to read a segment of my own piece, I chose the most personal part of my new book, The Way Home, a passage where the protagonist recalls how he neglected his family for his career. After I finished reading, the room was silent. Old Bai was the first to speak. Old M.O., this part is written. So realistically, it's a bit painful. Is this your personal experience? Sister Zheng asked directly. I hesitated for a moment, then nodded. To some extent, yes. No wonder, Xiao Wu said softly. I almost cried listening to it. After the workshop, Teacher Lin asked me to stay behind. Teacher Mo, this part is very well written, but you might want to consider your family's feelings before publishing. I understood what she meant. The Way Home was even more personal than Rebirth, almost a carbon copy of our family story. If it were published, Lee Waining might feel exposed, even betrayed. That night, I tossed and turned, eventually getting up to revise the manuscript. But I deleted and wrote and deleted, unable to decide how much truth to retain. At 3 a.m, I gave up on sleep and wrote a long email to my son, detailing my thoughts and confusion of the past few days. I didn't send it immediately after finishing, but saved it as a draft. I needed to think it over more. The next morning, an unexpected guest arrived at the residency center, Su Ming, a young female writer invited for a short-term exchange. She was around 30, dressed in a simple white shirt and jeans, and her conversation revealed both intelligence and a lively spirit. During lunch, we talked about the balance between creative work and family. After I finished my last book, my boyfriend and I broke up, Su Ming said with a wry smile, stirring her coffee. He said I became a different person when I was writing, cold and distant. Writing does require a certain degree of selfishness, I said thoughtfully, especially when writing true stories. But what cost? She looked straight into my eyes. I often thought, if I had to choose between writing and an important relationship, what would I choose? This question pierced me like a needle. If the publication of The Way Home would hurt Lee Waining, what would I choose? There was no progress in my writing that afternoon. I walked out of the residency center and wandered aimlessly along the West Lake until the ringing of my phone interrupted my thoughts. It was my son. Dad. His voice was full of excitement. My essay was selected for the provincial collection of outstanding works. The teacher said a parent needs to write a comment. Can you write it? Of course, I was infected by his joy. Does Mom know yet? Yeah, my son's voice lowered, but she's been locked in the study ever since she got back today. I heard her arguing with someone. My heart sank. Lee Waining rarely brought her work emotions home, let alone lose control in front of the child. Give the phone to Mom, I said quietly. After a moment, Lee Waining's deliberately calm voice came from the other end of the line. What's wrong? Xiao, Nen said you're not quite yourself today. I said directly. What on earth happened? After a long silence, she finally spoke. I've been demoted from department manager to a regular employee. Her voice sounded as if it came from far away. The new director said I lack ambition because I refuse to work overtime and go on business trips. A surge of anger rose in me. They can't do this. You've given so much to the company. Yeah, she gave a bitter smile, but the market is a battlefield. There's no room for sentiment. I'll come back tomorrow, I said firmly. No need. Her voice suddenly hardened. I don't need your pity, Emo Shufan. I can handle my own affairs. The call ended, leaving me standing by the West Lake, clutching the hot phone, feeling an unprecedented powerlessness. I knew Lee Waining's pride all too well. She would rather suffer everything alone than be seen as a weak person in need of help. Back at the residency center, I went directly to find Teacher Lin to ask about the possibility of leaving early. Theoretically, you can, she pushed up her glasses, but an editor from a publishing house is visiting next week, and this is very important for your new book. I was caught in a dilemma. On one hand, my family clearly needed me. On the other, this residency was a crucial opportunity for my writing career. That night, I had a dream. In the dream, I returned to that night 10 years ago when Lee Waining fell ill in bed. When I proposed giving up writing to take care of the family, the me in the dream shook his head. No, we can hire a nanny, but I can't give up writing. When I woke up, the sky outside was faintly light. The aftertaste of the dream left me in deep thought. 10 years ago, I chose family and gave up writing, leading to a decade of suppression and loss. Now that I have picked up writing again, am I to give up this hard-won career opportunity once more? At breakfast, Su Meng sat down next to me. You don't look so good. Didn't sleep well last night? I briefly told her about my family situation. After listening, she said thoughtfully, do you know why I like your rebirth? Because it shows a real struggle. Most people either choose family and completely give up themselves, or pursue themselves and neglect their family. But the hardest thing is to find a balance. The question is, where is this balance point? I smiled bitterly. There's no standard answer, she said softly, but perhaps you can ask yourself, 10 years from now, which decision are you more likely to regret? This question echoed in my mind all day. In the afternoon, I received an email from Old Chun. Rebirth had been shortlisted for this year's literary award, and the award ceremony was to be held on the weekend, right after the residency ended. This was major news. If I won, it would greatly enhance my literary status and the market prospects for my next book. But the award ceremony was in Shanghai, which meant that even after the residency ended, I couldn't go home immediately. After much hesitation, I told Lee Waining the news. On the other end of the phone, her reaction was unusually flat. Congratulations. Are you going to attend? I haven't decided yet. I said honestly, what do you think? It's your career, you decide. Her voice was terrifyingly calm. Waining, I took a deep breath. We need to talk. Not just about the awards ceremony, but about everything. Now is not the time, she said curtly. Let's talk when you get back. After hanging up, I felt an unprecedented loneliness. A month ago, we were as sweet as if we were falling in love again, but now it felt as if an invisible wall stood between us. The next day was the visit from the publishing house editor. We took turns having one-on-one conversations with the editor. When it was my turn, I took out the first 3 chapters of The Way Home. Editor Ms. Wong, a veteran in the industry in her 50s, took off her glasses and wiped them after reading. Mr. M.O., she began, "This part is written very bravely. But have you considered your family's feelings? Especially your wife's." "That's precisely what I'm hesitant about," I admitted. "These stories are important to me, but publishing it might hurt the people who matter," she finished my sentence. "It's a difficult choice. From a purely literary perspective, however, this is your best work to date." After our conversation, I felt even more conflicted. The Way Home was indeed my most authentic creation, but was it worth it if the price was hurting my family? That evening, the residency center organized a picnic by the lake. After a few rounds of drinks, the conversation turned to the timeless conflict between creation and family. "I wrote my best work after my divorce," Lao Bai said, chugging his beer. "Pain is a catalyst for creation. But my science fiction novels became warmer after my daughter was born," Xiao Wu countered. "Love is also a source of creation." Su Meng turned to me. "Mr. Mo, what do you think?" I gazed at the shimmering moonlight on the lake surface and said slowly, "I believe the best work should come from truth without harming the truth. The question is how to achieve that." After the picnic, I received a package. It was from my son. Inside was a stack of papers, his diary entries from the past few days, and a note. "Dad, Mom said I shouldn't disturb your writing, so I wrote these down for you to see." I sat under the desk lamp, flipping through the pages. My son's writing was childish yet sincere, recording the little details of life at home while I was away. "Mom worked late again today. I tried to heat up the braised pork ribs Dad left, but I burned them. Mom cried during a meeting. I pretended I didn't see. I miss Dad, especially when he used to help me revise my essays." At the very end, there was a letter addressed to me. "Dad, I know you're a famous writer now, and you're very busy. But can you come home sooner? Mom needs you, even though she won't admit it. I need you too. P.S. My new essay is called When My Dad Isn't Home. My teacher said it was very moving." My vision blurred. Putting down the diary, I opened my laptop and wrote a long letter to Li Weiniang, explaining my thoughts and decisions from the past few days. After I finished writing, I hesitated for a moment but still clicked send. Then I opened the document for The Way Home and began to revise it extensively. It was no longer a raw self-exposure, but a real core wrapped in a fictional shell. A story could be true without having to hurt real people. After working through the night, I finished the revised draft. The Way Home was still powerful, but it was no longer a betrayal of my family, but a universal story about love and compromise. As dawn broke, I sent the manuscript to editor Ms. Wong, then collapsed onto the bed and fell into a deep sleep. I woke up at noon to 2 missed calls and a text message on my phone, all from Li Weiniang. "Got your email? Xiaonan and I will be at your awards ceremony." Those few short words felt like a great weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I immediately called her, but there was no answer. She didn't call back until evening. "Sorry, I was in meetings today." Her voice sounded tired but calm. "You've decided to attend the awards ceremony?" "Yes," I said softly, "but I'll come home immediately afterward, whether I win or not." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. "Mo Shufan, I don't want you to give up anything because of me. I've been thinking a lot this past month. Maybe I've always been too controlling." This sudden self-reflection left me at a loss for words. "We both have things we need to adjust," I finally said. "When I get back, let's start over, okay?" "Okay." Her voice was almost a whisper. "Xiaonan misses you a lot." "I do too." After hanging up, I stood by the window, watching the tour boats come and go on Westlake. A month ago, I came here full of expectations for my literary career. Now, I couldn't wait to go home. This wasn't about abandoning myself, but about finding something more important than myself. The people who love me, need me, and whom I need in return. On the last day of the residency, editor Ms. Wong called. "Mr. Mo, we've decided to publish The Way Home. It's more mature than Rebirth. While it's not as sharp, it has a more universal appeal." I thanked her, and after hanging up, I started packing my bags. Amy month of solitude had allowed me to see many things clearly. I could be a writer, a husband, and a father all at once. These identities didn't have to be mutually exclusive. They could enrich one another. Before I left, Su Ming came to see me off. Have you found your answer? Not yet, I said honestly, but I know what's more important now. She smiled and handed me a book. My new work, something for you to read on the way. Remember, writing is for connection, not isolation. As the train started moving, I opened the book to the flyleaf. It was inscribed, "To teacher Mo, may both your words and your life find their way home." I gazed at the rapidly retreating scenery outside the window and thought of the ending of The Way Home. Home is not a cage that hinders flight, but a harbor where the weary can land. And love is not mutual possession, but always remembering the way home while flying on your own. The award ceremony was tomorrow. Whether I won or not, I had already gained something more important, a redefined family, and a self that was no longer lost. The award ceremony was held at the Shanghai Grand Theater. I stood backstage, my fingers constantly adjusting the already smooth lapel of my suit. Old Chun was muttering beside me, reminding me of the key point for my acceptance speech, but I didn't hear a single word. Mo Shufan, a staff member peeked in. "You're on in 5 minutes." I took a deep breath and pulled out my phone. No new messages. When I spoke with Li Weiniang last night, she said she would try her best to make it, but something urgent had come up at work, and she might not get there in time for the ceremony. Her voice sounded tired and distant, and I didn't dare ask more. "Don't be nervous." Old Chun patted my shoulder. "Rebirth fully deserves this award." I forced a smile. A month ago, I would have been ecstatic for such recognition. But now, the glory of standing in the spotlight felt strangely hollow. If the two most important people weren't here, what was the point of it all? And now, please welcome the winner of the Best Literary Work of the Year, Mo Shufan, for Rebirth. Amidst the applause, I walked onto the stage. The glaring lights made it impossible to see the audience clearly. I could only vaguely make out the judges and literary figures seated in the front row. I stood at the microphone, the trophy heavy in my hands, the metal plate engraved with my name shimmering under the lights. Thank you to the judges. Thank you to my editor, Old Chun. My voice sounded unusually thin in the vast hall. This book, Rebirth, tells the story of a middle-aged man finding himself again. As I delivered my prepared speech, my eyes kept scanning the entrance, hoping to see that familiar figure rushing in with our son. But the doors remained tightly shut. Finally, I decided to deviate from the prepared script. I want to thank my wife, Li Weiniang. 10 years ago, I gave up writing to take care of our family. 10 years later, she supported me in picking up my dream again. Without her sacrifice, this book would not exist. A wave of understanding applause rose from the audience. I saw a few female judges even dabbing their eyes. "It's just..." My voice choked for a moment. "I wish she could be here right now. Weiniang, if you're listening, half of this trophy belongs to you." The applause grew more fervent. I quickly bowed and left the stage, my eyes burning. As I walked down the steps, an excited Old Chun met me. "That was brilliant. That impromptu part was absolutely perfect. The media is going to love this story." I managed a weak smile and handed him the trophy. "I'm going to the restroom." In a stall in the restroom, I took several deep breaths, trying to calm the turmoil of emotions inside me. The joy of winning was washed out by a much stronger sense of loss. I took out my phone, still no messages. Hesitating for a moment, I dialed Li Weiniang's number, only to hear the cold, automated voice. "The number you have dialed is switched off." Leaving the restroom, I decided to head straight back to the hotel. The post-ceremony reception held no meaning for me. Just as I was crossing the side hall of the theater, a familiar voice made me stop in my tracks. "Dad!" I turned to see my son in a small suit, his hair neatly combed, running towards me. Behind him, Li Weiniang stood there, wearing a red dress I knew so well, the one she wore on our first date 10 years ago. My legs suddenly gave way, and I could only crouch down to catch my son as he threw himself into my arms. He exclaimed excitedly, "We're late. Mom's flight was delayed, and we ran all the way here, but we still missed you getting the award." I held him tightly, my eyes fixed on Li Weiniang as she slowly walked closer. She had on exquisite makeup, but her eyes were red and swollen, clear evidence she had been crying. The red dress had faded slightly, and it was a bit looser around the waist than it used to be, but on her, it was still so beautiful it made my heart ache. "Congratulations," she said softly, handing me a small box. "Sorry I missed your big moment." I took the box and opened it. Inside was a simple men's watch. On the back of the watch face, 2 lines of small words were engraved. To the writer, Househusband, from your forever first reader. My fingers trembled as I traced the words. In 10 years, this was the first gift I had received that wasn't socks or a tie. My throat felt like it was blocked by something, and I couldn't form a complete sentence. "We watched the live broadcast," my son said excitedly. "You said half of the trophy belonged to Mom." The host said it was the most touching moment of the night. Lee Waning's eyes glistened. "I didn't know you were going to say that." "Because it's the truth. I finally found my voice. Without you, I wouldn't be who I am today." She shook her head, a slight smile on her lips. "No, Househusband, you earned who you are today. I just finally learned not to stand in your way." My son looked back and forth between us and suddenly said, "Can I go see the trophy?" Uncle Chun said it's at the front. I nodded, watched him run off, then turned to Lee Waning. "The company matter. Is it resolved?" "I resigned," she said calmly, as if discussing the weather. "I submitted my resignation officially this morning." I looked at her, shocked. "What? But you fought for that for 15 years. "It wasn't worth it," she interrupted. "The new management completely changed the company culture. It was either fall in line or leave." She took a deep breath. I chose to leave. I reached out to hug her, then hesitated. But Lee Waning took a step forward and leaned into my embrace. Smelling the familiar scent of her shampoo, my eyes welled up again. "I'm sorry," she whispered in my ear. "All these years, I treated you as my accessory, not as an equal partner. I was at fault too." I held her tightly. I avoided communication, used silence to resist control, and in the end, I just ran away. We stood there, holding each other in the side hall of the theater. People came and went around us, but in that moment, it felt like we were the only 2 people in the world. Ahem. My son had returned at some point, holding my trophy and clearing his throat loudly. "Mind the setting. This is a public area." We separated with a laugh. Lee Waning wiped the corners of her eyes and straightened her dress. "Is the hotel booked?" "Booked," I said, taking the trophy and holding our son's hand with the other. "It's nearby. Let's go then," she said, naturally taking my arm. "We have a lot to talk about." Back in the hotel room, our son excitedly fiddled with the trophy while Lee Waning and I sat at the small table by the window. In the night, the lights of Shanghai twinkled like stars. "So," I asked softly, "what's the plan now?" "Rest for a while first," she said, gazing out the window. "Then, maybe start a small consulting firm. The connections and experience I've built over these 15 years shouldn't go to waste." She turned to me. "But this time, I'll control the workload. There should be a balance between family and work." "That sounds wonderful," I smiled. "I have some news too. The return journey has been signed, and the advance is enough for us to live on for a while." Her eyes lit up. "That's great. I knew that book would be a success." After a pause, she asked, Is our story in it?" "Some of it," I admitted honestly, "but I changed a lot of the details, so no one would directly connect it to us. If you're worried, you can read it before it's published, and we can change anything you're not comfortable with." She shook her head. "No need. I trust your judgment." This simple statement of trust moved me more than any praise could. "Mom, Dad," our son suddenly jumped onto the bed. "Did you know, all my classmates say you're the model couple." Lee Waning and I looked at each other and smiled. A model couple? We were probably the least model-like pair. We had gone through conflict, separation, and reconciliation to barely find a way to be with each other. "Come here," I beckoned to my son. When he came close, I put him in the middle. "Listen, Xiaonan, there's no such thing as a perfect family in this world. What's important is that we are willing to change for each other." "Like you and Mom?" he asked, looking up. "Just like us," Lee Waning said, stroking his head. "Dad learned to stand up for himself, and Mom learned to respect his choices. And you learned to express your own thoughts." My son nodded thoughtfully. "Then can I write about this in my essay? How my parents reconciled?" "Of course you can," I smiled, ruffling his hair. "But don't write it too realistically. Save some face for your dad." That night, after our son fell asleep, Lee Waning and I sat on the balcony, sharing a bottle of red wine. The night breeze was gentle, carrying the unique clamor and vitality of the metropolis. "Remember our first date?" she asked suddenly. "It was a night just like this, and I was wearing this dress." "I remember," I smiled. "You kept talking about your 5-year career plan, and I was thinking about how to kiss you." She chuckled softly. "You had a light in your eyes back then. Later, that light slowly disappeared. I thought it was because of age, but now I know it was me who extinguished it." I held her hand. "It's not all your fault. I could have communicated earlier instead of just bottling it up." "We were both at fault," she sighed, "but luckily, we still have a chance to make it right." We drank in silence for a while, enjoying the long-lost intimacy. In the distance, the Oriental Pearl Tower changed colors, like a constantly regenerating dream. "Oh, right," Li Weining said suddenly. "I have an idea about the division of household chores." I raised an eyebrow. "I'm all ears." "We can hire a part-time cleaner 3 times a week to handle the cleaning and cooking. That way, you'll have a fixed time for writing, and I'll have time to deal with work," she said seriously. "On weekends, we can cook together as a family activity." "Sounds reasonable." I nodded, "but there's one problem." "What?" "I might miss my kitchen," I said with mock seriousness, "especially that cleaver I've been using for 10 years. She laughed and gave me a light punch. "Be serious. Also, I'm planning to make every Wednesday family day. No work, no writing, just the 3 of us doing something together." "Deal." I raised my glass, but on one condition. "What condition?" "You have to be the first reader of my new book." I clinked her glass. "A real first reader, not the perfunctory kind." Her eyes sparkled in the night. "I promise. And I'll be very strict, so be prepared for criticism. Great author." We looked at each other and smiled. At that moment, I felt a brand new possibility. We didn't have to choose between family and career, but could find a balance, allowing them to coexist and even nourish each other. The next morning, the 3 of us went to the bund. Our son ran around excitedly, taking pictures, while Li Weining and I walked slowly behind, hand in hand. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "About the ending of The Way Home," I said, looking at the boats on the Huangpu River. "The protagonist finally finds a balance between family and career." "Sounds like a good ending," she smiled. "No," I shook my head. "The best ending is that he realizes it's not the end, but a new beginning. Balance isn't static, but a dynamic process that requires constant adjustment." She nodded thoughtfully. "Just like our marriage. Just like life itself," I added. Our son ran back, pulling us to get ice cream. Under the sun, his smiling face was so bright, as if it carried all our hopes and future. On the first weekend after returning home, we held a formal family meeting. Li Weining made a beautiful PowerPoint presentation detailing the new division of labor and schedule. Our son was in charge of supervision and proposed a fine system for violations, and I promised to cook my specialty braised pork ribs for everyone once a week. After the meeting, we cooked together. Li Weining's knife skills were still clumsy, but she no longer got angry about it. Our son excitedly tossed the salad, getting lettuce leaves everywhere. And as for me, standing in front of the stove, I suddenly felt an unprecedented sense of satisfaction. This was not a forced responsibility, but an active choice. A month later, The Way Home was officially published. The first print run of 50,000 copies sold out within a week, and the publisher rushed to reprint. The media's reviews of the book even surpassed those for Rebirth, calling it a sincere work of self-discovery for middle-aged men. On the day of the book signing, Li Weining and our son sat in the front row. When I read the passage about family reconciliation, I looked up and saw their focused gazes, and suddenly I couldn't continue. "Sorry," I said to the readers present, "this passage. I want to dedicate it to 2 people in particular." I looked directly at Li Weining and our son. Without them, this book would not exist. Amid the applause, I saw Li Weining wipe away tears from the corner of her eyes, while our son proudly straightened his back. At that moment, I understood what true success was, not sales and reviews, but not losing the most important people in my life while pursuing my dreams. After the book signing, we went to a nearby restaurant to celebrate. My son excitedly counted how many books I had signed that day, while Li Weining was in a heated discussion with the editor from the publishing house. She seemed to have her own ideas about book marketing. "You know," Li Weining said suddenly on the way home, I have an idea. Since I have my own consulting firm now, maybe I can specialize in providing brand management services for writers. That sounds great, I smiled. You can finally put your business mind to use in literature. Besides, she winked slyly. This way I can justifiably follow you to various literary events and monitor whether or not you're surrounded by young female fans. I laughed out loud. Saoli, are you jealous? Of course not, she snorted. I'm just taking full advantage of a business opportunity. Our son turned his head from the front seat. Mom, you're mixing business with pleasure. We all laughed. In the night, the car drove towards home. There was my study, Li Weining's home office, and our son's homework. There were quarrels, laughter, and an imperfect but real life. And all of this began with that decision, to no longer be the Househusband that others expected, but to be my true self. A writer, a husband, a father, a flawed but ever-growing person. This was true rebirth.